Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. Shadowlands is going through a variety of changes week by week. And while Blizzard hasn't really hit up on any of the specs and classes in particular, a lot of the classes and specs are still unfinished. There's still a lot of specs and playstyles that haven't been touched that should have been addressed because of the way that BFA has altered the playstyles. Some specs and classes just don't feel that great. While others, while losing all of the value of all the essences and traits, are actually feeling quite amazing to play. So in this video, I want to highlight some of the specs that, shedding everything that BFA has to offer, still feel amazing, smooth, and are very enjoyable, at least currently on the alpha. There's a good change in the alpha. Blizzard is going to adjust these specs in the future, but I'm not expecting major changes out of these 5 specs, as right now, all of them feel really good to play. Rogues, you will be very excited and happy that Assassination feels amazing to play. For Assassination, we're just seeing things returning to the spec, like Toxic Blade essentially becoming baseline, as well as the way the Covenant abilities play into the specs and the return of Slice and Dice. Now, Assassination is going to be one of the specs that doesn't change too much, so if you're hoping for radical new changes, you might be looking at something like Subtlety, which is looking a lot more favorable, or Outlaw that's going through a massive transition. But with Assassination, you'll still find the good old spec of Rogue that you remember from back in the day, just a little bit better with a few more abilities. The playstyle for Assassination between its weave of bleeds and poisons is great, and managing debuffs as well as now buffs for the actual gameplay of the spec really doesn't feel terrible at all. The damage you output is all relative, as damage is going to be scaled around, but with the current setup, if Assassination did 0 damage, the playstyle will still be very enjoyable. The spec has a methodology behind it, and now with the inclusion of Slice and Dice and a baseline Toxic Blade, that methodology and playstyle really centers itself. That's one of the things that Assassination Rogues always had to choose. Do you play for a bleed heavy playstyle or a poison heavy playstyle? And after Toxic Blade started really winning ahead of itself, then abilities like Exsanguinate, which offers a very high bleed playstyle with very increasing bursts, just simply fell out. And Blizzard now doesn't make you choose, because since so many people like Toxic Blade, it simply becomes a base playstyle with Shiv returning to the spec and essentially making Shiv the new Toxic Blade, which doesn't give the same power or the damage aspect of the original Toxic Blade, but still creates a bit of that punch for nature bursty damage. I really cannot help but emphasize how good it feels in terms of playing a spec that lost all those things that BFA has to offer, from various essences and traits. Assassination still continues to be that spec that's going to be familiar for many of you, even after shedding its Battle for Azeroth skin, but it's looking very fun and still very enjoyable to play going into Shadowlands. Another spec on this list I would have to put down is a Destruction Warlock. The spec is essentially going, as of right now, into Battle for Azeroth, a very base playstyle. You don't have any of the essences to make the spec really shine, but when you think about some of the essences and traits, most of them were all about summoning more Infernals, which Blizzard can fix still to this day with a couple talent additions into the spec. But if your love for chucking out massive Chaos Bolts into enemies' faces, blittering them with massive powerful damage, if that is your playstyle choice and love when it comes to Warlocks, then I feel like you'll find Destruction Warlocks to still stay and be familiar. All Warlocks in general are getting access to curses, which is going to give you a little bit extra utility to your spec. You have boring stuff like Curse of Doom, which after a bit of time is going to tick down for extra shadow damage, but that's going to be an extra dot and instacast ability for you to manage within your rotation for single target boss fights. But in dungeons, now you have yourself a very wide variety of tools between Curse of Weakness, Curse of Tongues, and even Curse of Recklessness, even though I'm still not sure how you're supposed to use that curse properly on dungeon trash packs. Destruction also has the return of the Summoning Circle, which allows you to teleport around the place, send a portal and teleport into that location at a moment's notice if ever the situation requires it to. So for a class that's all about standing down, holding ground, and turreting a bunch of Chaos Bolts, you'll have some baseline mobility. Right now on the alpha, Destro doesn't feel like it's fully finished. It feels like there's going to be changes for Blizzard will want to add to the spec before it is over, but it still feels great to play, and it's something that really draws people into the Destruction. That same feel is going to be felt when it comes to Shadowlands. Out of all the specs of mages, I would have to say the Frost Mage is the one spec that gotten the least amount of changes. In terms of the traits and essences, you don't really play with traits and essences that altered your gameplay too much. Besides the obvious changes that mages are getting when it comes to PvP, when it comes to talking about general settings and general setup, The Frost Mage is still going to be one of the specs that's going to be tried and true going into Shadowlands. When it comes to traits and essences, again, not a lot of changes was made in BFA, so shedding that skin won't really do much for you when it comes to losing power as a Frost Mage. You still have a massive array of slows, from AoE slows to single target slows to frontal slows to roots, a lot of roots in your toolkit. So being able to kite around powerful enemies, groups of trashbacks, or even other players is going to be core to the playstyle. You also have a variety of different talents and still the same playstyle of massive icicles damage or combining them together into a single powerful glacial spike that's still going to be available for Frost Mage, at least as of right now. If this spec doesn't see a lot of changes going on forward, it's still going to be a very reliable caster. In terms of range classes on Shadowlands right now, it feels like a lot more work has been given into the melee classes, at least so far, unless you count an Elemental Shaman, while the range classes feel fairly simple and mostly untouched. So if Frost Mage continues to be one of those specs that will be untouched, it still has that extra edge above other range classes, that extra slow capability in order to keep enemies at bay, while firing off a flurry of frosty spells, getting you massive crits and massive shatter bonuses to, well, literally shatter your foes. Another spec that I can recommend is going to be Beastmaster Hunter. While this spec actually has some challenge changes, for the most part the basic rotation and playstyle for Beast Mastery is actually going to get even simpler than BFA. Instead of becoming a crit hunter, it's going to be more base hunter, where you are all about trying to get kill commands on cooldown, using your Cobra shot whenever you have too much focus, and then trying to maintain the enrage bonus for your pet for as long as possible. There are a couple talents added in order to change some of your playstyles, but nothing major to the point where you're not going to recognize Beastmaster Hunter. And besides the AoE cap that your pet is going to have an AoE, for the most part it's going to feel fairly similar. I think still it's going to be one of the better classes to play if you're someone who does a lot of leading inside of raids. For example, like a, raid leader. You have a fairly simple rotation with very simple focus, so you're able to call out mechanics that happen in AoE, while also having a maintained mobility because the class has no cast abilities, all instants, from a range, from afar, while your pet tears into your foes. This is going to be a class a lot of you guys will still recognize, especially if you are a new player. For a lot of new players, having a pet to tank things for you and take the aggro off of you can definitely feel a lot more enjoyable when it comes to exploring the world, and especially things like leveling. So for a lot of you guys that are going to be new to the game and remember the old school Beastmaster Hunter, I would say that Beastmaster Hunter is another one of those classes I can easily recommend when it comes to the future expansion of Shadowlands. Another class that I can recommend that mostly went unchanged, is a Demon Hunter. Demon Hunters have gotten some actual changes, mostly Blizzard taking certain things away from Demon Hunters. But in terms of the actual gameplay loop and the abilities you'll be using when it comes to fighting your foes, nothing is really going to change. You're still going to be a Demon Hunter, jumping around, zooming all over the map, going from massive big cleave damage and even doing obliteratingly strong single target damage to one, multiple enemies, or a billion enemies. Demon Hunters are going to be still very, very useful in terms of dungeons and groups because of a massive debuff that they bring that no other class does. And their toolkit for mobility and with talents, survivability is still going to be very strong. Demon Hunters are a new class that has been added in Legion, and I was expecting for them to get a lot more new abilities and mechanics to play with. And I guess the alpha isn't still over yet, so there's still time for it. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see if Blizzard adds anything new to the Demon Hunter. But if you like the current Demon Hunter, the massive cleave / single target capability that you have, the incredible mobility to go anywhere you please, and if that's something that sounds exciting to you, then Demon Hunter is going to be one of those classes that you might want to start leveling now when it comes to Battle for Azeroth and continue playing forward into Shadowlands. It's looking like it's only going to get stronger and better with different Covenant abilities to augment your playstyles. And this is going to wrap up my video on the 5 specs that are going mostly unchanged, but are definitely one of those specs that I would recommend easily to any new player when it comes to preparation for Shadowlands. Learning how these specs play currently on Battle for Azeroth will help you forward into Shadowlands. So if you're someone who is interested in that kind of playstyle and wants to play any of these specs, you're more than welcome to start playing right now. For a lot of players, change is good, and a lot of players love changing new things for classes. They like new abilities, they like complete reworks, they like all this new and exciting things, but not everybody likes change. Some of us want to be able to play the same class you've been playing and have at least a familiar feel to them. Maybe a couple new things added without the point where the spec feels completely different as a whole nother focus on a playstyle. But those are the 5 specs that I would recommend if you're someone who likes the good old of the playstyles you have right now and don't want them to change too much but still feel and look effective for the future expansion. Those would be the 5 specs that I would recommend at least at this very moment. However, Shadowlands Alpha changes regularly, so there's a good chance more changes and more things will come, as this has only been a few weeks of Shadowlands Alpha where Blizzard isn't really finalized with classes or tuning for that matter. But if you're someone who's trying to prepare ahead of time, well, hopefully you found this video helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another video.